Welcome back to Leveraging Leadership, where we unpack the art of business leadership. I'm your host, Emily Sander, Chief of Staff turned Executive Leadership Coach. This show is all about finding your points of greatest influence and leveraging them to better serve those around you. And our guest today is Bethany McAleer, and she is the Chief Actuary for Johns Hopkins. And her acting chief of staff is Natalie Cron, who was actually on this show in episode 48. Bethany, welcome to Leveraging Leadership. So what does the chief actuary at Johns Hopkins do? What are some of your responsibilities and how is your team structured?
Yeah, so actually I recently have taken an expanded role in the organization. So I'm the chief actuary and the chief analytics officer. So my scope has kind of broadened a bit, but actuaries are like a blend of a business background, a math degree, statistics. Functionally, what they do is they take historical data, work with it, adjust it based on known and patterns, and predict it into the future. And so that's kind of the base function of what actuaries do. They work a lot with finance departments, doing budgeting, forecasting, rate setting, that sort of thing. I also have a tower underneath me of an advanced analytics team, and we do everything from trend analytics, looking for patterns in data, working with the business to try to come up with opportunities for them to drive action and take advantage of new business opportunities based on the data. We have a strong clinical analytics program where we're helping to shape clinical strategy and evaluating whether our health plans, clinical programs are effective, where there's opportunities to improve or pivot. I also do, a whole side of healthcare is provider relationships. And the provider side, we analyze provider performance. And then I have another function on my team that does data reporting, dashboarding, self-service. So it's kind of the strategy behind information delivery across our organization.
Okay. And are you reporting into the CEO?
CFO.
CFO. Okay. So you and Natalie knew each other from before.
Yes. We worked at Magellan Health together. And she actually started as a project manager that reported into me. And Natalie's just the best at all kinds of things. So she her role morphed and expanded into more of a chief of staff type of position. It was actually interesting. It was one where my boss was working with her on a special project and said to me, you need Natalie. You got to have Natalie in this role. And I wasn't even convinced, what would I even have her do? So that was how that kind of morphed. But yeah, we had such a great relationship and working dynamic that when I moved here, I knew it was only a matter of time before I brought her over.
And when you brought her over, was that in the acting chief of staff role, or did you have the intention of eventually I'm going to get her into this role? How did that work?
No, I knew I needed her in that acting chief of staff role. So, it's sort of I think it's an evolution that's continuing to happen, but she came in and focused on relationship building. So, my staff, for example, was not used to working with someone in that kind of a role. And so do we even need this as part of the question? And, it's the thing you don't know that you need until you have it, and then you can't do without it. And so she kind of focused on building trust, building relationships, support, partnership with my leadership staff. And it certainly didn't take long for them to realize how invaluable her skill set is to the team, which is very different than, we're in a technical team that does a lot of data and analytics, and Natalie comes from a totally different background. So.
Yeah, so I'm just curious, when you brought her into the team and people are like, do we need this? I'm not sure what this is. You said she built relationships, but how did you tee her up?
Yeah, I think part of that was telling the story of how Natalie came to work for me, because I had a similar process. And so I think that was one of the things. I had good relationships with my staff, and that made a difference. So there was a little bit of, you got to trust me on this, and this isn't going to drive a wedge between the two of, our relationship. And so I think that was part of the concern is, are we now going to have, is Natalie going to be the person that we're always going to? And so there was a little bit of that. But just sharing with them that I kind of had a mental journey around it too, and their trust of me, it wasn't a big deal. And they were all open to it. And like I said, just kind of quickly saw the value. I think sometimes you need to see it to believe it.
Yeah, you need to see it in action. And if you've never seen it before, you don't know what it's supposed to look like. So that can become a thing. But like you said, once you have a fully fledged, robust, effective chief of staff, you never want to go back. So one other thing.
Like out the gate, like I think where there's, like I said, the role is kind of evolving, but again, with a technical staff, like communication and presentation is something that isn't supernatural to folks, so they don't necessarily have the strength of those skills. And Natalie does have that strength. So she had a balance of skills and capabilities that she came in and really helped to elevate everybody else's performance. I think that was the initial buy-in factor. Like this is really going to help me in my career, was that initial step. And now it's kind of like, how do we morph Natalie's role to be a little different, to kind of be more of a strategic leader and that sort of thing than just that, hey, let me show you how to make your PowerPoint really amazing, and get this effective presentation across to executives. And so it's been a process.
And on the communication piece, you have mentioned that Natalie has helped you specifically with your communication, streamline that and bounce ideas about, hey, how does this sound? Can you talk about how you and her work together on that?
She's like my second brain and like a gut check. Like sometimes you always have those emails. You're like, is this too much? So just even getting her second view of tone and all of that, it can be helpful to just have that person right there. But she just, from an efficiency perspective too, I mean, there's just too much to juggle in a day. She drafts emails for me. She's learned my style, and so she can kind of write an email. It sounds like me, which is incredible, and it just helps me to cover more territory. And I don't think it's inauthentic, because it's still looking at it, tweaking it, and she's kind of learning. But it's just that meshing of being able to work together so well. It's been so helpful.
Yeah. And I'm always curious about the interplay between intellectual respect and appreciation for different ways one can add value, especially in fields like science and medicine and academia. So I have a client now who's a chief of staff in higher ed. And in that world, a lot of people are judging you on the letters behind your name and how many papers you've written. And some people are going to look down on people who don't have those things. So I'm just wondering if that's come into play with your team.
It's a great question. And I have kind of two thoughts on it. I'll share for myself. I think a lot of my success as a leader has come from the non-technical side of my capabilities. Being an actuary, it's very detail oriented, it's very technical. There's stereotypes around who actuaries are, and I never really fit into that. So a lot of my leadership here has been pushing people to see beyond that. Like a lot of people are smart, a lot of people are technical. You differentiate yourself on the other stuff. Like if you can tell a story that resonates with people, if you can explain things in a way where they get it and can engage with it. So that's been a big emphasis of my leadership. And so I think having Natalie step into that, and then people seeing that like that's what she brings and we can learn from her, it just sort of fits. So I think that's been a big thing. I think I'll say on the flip side, and I hate to speak for Natalie, but I think there's been some of that on her side is like, is she good enough? Does she feel respect for herself in some ways for what she brings to the table when she's the sort of, let's say, odd woman out, with her skill set versus this whole team of folks who knows a bunch of stuff she doesn't know, or does things that she doesn't know how to do. And so that's like, there's that aspect of it too, is just seeing and feeling good about the value you bring to the table, even if it might be different from what everybody else has.
Yes. And I run into so many chiefs of staff who say, Emily, I don't have anything to offer. They're all smarter than me. They all are subject matter experts in this area. I have nothing to contribute to this conversation. And I say, on the contrary, you can help translate that into human terms or into non-technical language that's going to be understood by other groups. And when you have a leader who appreciates that and recognizes that, I think that can bring a lot to a team, a lot to the success of a team. So thank you for being one of those leaders.
Yeah, and actually, like a leader mentor of mine recently said, came to speak with my team and said to us in such a succinct way, as you move up in leadership, it becomes so much less about what you know and so much more about who you are. And I love that, because I think we lean so hard into what we know. You know, it can be this armor of like demonstrating how valuable we are. But I think that just like trying to pivot our attitude around how important that is versus, you know, I mean, leadership is in, and getting things done as a team. There's just so many other skills that become so critically important that are, and nothing to do with your subject matter expertise.
And I think too, I mean, a lot of leadership is about getting to an outcome, yes, but you're doing important work through and with others. And so if you can find their strengths and put it all together, that's a big part of your job as a leader, not how much knowledge does my team have? How much knowledge do I have?
Yeah, and I'll again, like throwing kind of a personal evolution into this. When I worked at Magellan with Natalie, I had the opportunity to really build my own leadership team, which is a great opportunity. And I didn't realize until, you know, upon reflection that like I had hired, you know, like 5 white women in their 30s. Like I hired a bunch of little me's, you know, and it like kind of worked really well in some regard because we're all like kind of moving in, you know, on the same page. But then when I came into this role, I'm thinking about, I had another opportunity to hire my own leadership staff. And I wanted to be really intentional about hiring a diverse staff. Like that's important to me. And I believe in that. So I have a really diverse staff. But now I'm at the point where I'm like, okay, how do I get them to work together? Because they all have good relationships with each other, but it's like how to take that diversity and create something better than the sum of the parts with it is sort of my new challenge, is how do we work together such that we're, you know, putting it all in the pot and coming out with something amazing. It's hard. So because there's a lot of disagreements and different perspectives and those sorts of things,
Sure.
and how to make the most out of that. So it's interesting, like as leadership, like how do you just, even those basic skills of having productive conversations, making decisions, making sure everybody is heard, those things are difficult.
They are, but they're the mark of a high level leader. And in none of that is knowledge. I didn't hear like, oh, I hired people for like the amount of degrees they had or the amount of years of experience in this. So I think that's great. So you had mentioned that Natalie was building these relationships. So I'm really curious, how has she built and maintained relationships that maybe you don't have time for, or you just don't have the opportunity to build at the level that she does?
Well, yeah. So Natalie's strength, that's a strength of Natalie's that I would not say is a strength of mine. And I've learned a lot from her and how she builds relationships as well. Because she has an intuition around that just doesn't, it's not my strength. So, she's built solid relationships with my staff. I think I have good relationships with my staff too, but it's just a different nature. That was important for her to get the support and to be, you know, become a part of the team. She has relationships at different levels within the organization with other chiefs of staff that I think have been tremendously valued. She can get information quickly that she needs. She can kind of navigate what's going on in territory where she has trusted things. So I think the layers of my relationships and hers fit together very well. I will say that, things that I've learned from even just watching her, it's been super valuable for me, but she pays attention to details about people that I don't pay attention to. So she asks them questions about their kids, their pets, their interests, and she takes note of them, and then she follows it. Like, that's brilliant. And it's like something that would never occur to me. I'm like, let's get down to business. What do we need to talk about today so we can be productive? But I've noticed, she also pays attention to people's mood and like what's kind of something feels off with this person that I just can breeze over a lot of the time. So I think that I've learned a lot from her just from observation. Sometimes she picks up on things and I'm like, how did you know that? And she can kind of explain herself, but I think that's been valuable for me.
And so it sounds like she's able to like surface or relay unspoken sentiments within the team that might be useful.
Yes. Yeah, she is. I think she has a real good intuition of picking up what's lurks beneath the surface.
And I know for my principal, one of the benefits that he got from having a chief of staff was basically a trusted dumping ground. So when he needed to vent and just he needed to have a no holds barred, safe space. I just need to vent. Don't take action. I don't need to be PC. My job was to hold that space, hold that container. And it was almost like, I don't know if you know, I think it was Get Smart, but the cone of silence where you can go in there and you can yell and you can scream and it stays there. That's what I felt like I provided to my principal all of the time. And he had expressed that was very valuable to him. So I'm wondering if that comes into play with you and Natalie at any time.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I mean, you need to have that just like unfiltered spewing of thoughts and feelings. And then at the end, we come back to earth and we're like, okay, now what are we going to do about it? But I think, I think too is something that I've heard people say, but like is becoming, it becomes more and more real is like as you move up levels of leadership, it just gets lonelier. And I think particularly like as a woman leader in a largely like male leadership environment, there's not that many people that you feel like you can turn to, and so I think that relationship, it's so important. I was saying to Natalie the other day, she had a PTO day, and I was like, where do I channel this? Didn't have an outlet, but that completely that's very valuable.
And I know that over the last 12, 18 months that both you've taken on kind of a shift in responsibilities and Natalie's had to step up as well. So can you talk a little bit about, we have these titles and we were this title from this date to that date, but even within that, we're growing as people, we're growing professionally. So can you talk a little bit about how principals and chiefs of staff can evolve and elevate together?
Yes, that's something that Natalie and I are actively talking through is what does that look like for each of us? And how does kind of like what I wouldn't be able to do on my own in terms of, kind of making an evolution or pivoting approaches and involvement in various things because she's there and she can kind of pivot with me. Very helpful. But so for me, I'll just admittedly, like I'm a control freak. Like I like to have my hands in all the pots and kind of know what's going on. And I'm used to being very involved. And so that's been my own pushing myself, step out, like let people do their thing. But that's been hard for me. And I will also tell people like all of my like key points of leadership growth have happened by necessity. Like, you kind of hit like a hypothetical rock bottom and you're like, you have to change because you just cannot handle it anymore. And so I feel like I'm at a crossroads now where I thought I could manage all of this stuff and it's just not happening. And I'm not feeling good about it. And these people probably aren't feeling good about it. And so something needs to give. And so for me, to be able to step out of some of the things, I need somebody else to step in. And so that's that's kind of like our move together. And so having those conversations of how does Natalie take on a stronger authoritative role that she's not previously had on the team? Because it's a pivot for her, for the team, for me, but a necessity in order us, for us all to kind of get where we need to go. And so those are some of the active conversations we're having right now of how to do that and how to do that in a way that feels true to who you are, because Natalie is a very support minded, she'll say like servant leader. She's such a kind hearted soul. Like sometimes being, feeling like thinking about what does it look like or feel like to be authoritative feels uncomfortable and potentially at odds with who I see myself as. And so trying to figure out how to make that all work together.
For you to step out and step back a little bit, someone else has to step in and step up. And both of those moves require different things from each party. So first of all, thank you for just sharing that and saying, hey, sometimes I'm too much of a control freak and I get in there at micromanagement level, but I recognize that and I'm actually actively working on that and putting my team in place to fill these spots. So I think that's a huge thing for people to hear. So thank you for sharing. And I'm assuming that the rest of your team has to evolve as well. So is that it sounds like a pretty conscious conversation with you and Natalie. Is that also, let's get this message out to the rest of our team? Hey, we need to do things differently as a group now.
Yes and no, because I think that when I took this new expanded role, several folks on my staff also took new expanded roles, and we had that conversation. Okay, what does this mean, and how is this different from yesterday? And so, like, I did kind of like, here's expectations, right, of how both what I expect you to be responsible for, what my role is, and what we should be talking about out the gate, and then kind of 3-month checkpoint, and then. But those should be, the reason I say yes and no, those should be more frequent conversations. And I think sometimes I get too caught up in my own world that I don't stop and have those. I think that with this pivot that Natalie and I are talking about, it will be a point to say, okay, here, like we need to communicate that, be explicit, talk about what this looks like. And so hopefully that's a good opportunity to kind of like launch that conversation too, about what does this look like different for you again. But I could certainly be better about having those things frequently. And I think that's actually part of the problem and why to make this more, because I just haven't had the time or the wherewithal.
Yeah.
To like focus on the conversations I need to be having. And that's a huge part of the problem.
Yes, to lift you out into those higher level activities, conversations, focus areas. Okay. As we wrap up here, if you were talking to an executive who maybe wasn't as familiar with the chief of staff role, or maybe they had heard about it but hadn't seen it in action, what would you say to that person if they're kind of trying to decide, do I need a chief of staff? Do I really need a chief of staff? Is that right for me and my team?
So this happened to me, and I think upon reflection, I'm going to do it differently next time. But I think like the initial thing that I would say is a little bit of what I said earlier. It's like the thing that you don't know you needed until you have it, and then you're like, I could never be without this thing. And I think the thing that I missed in that's important is it is an investment of time. So not convincing people that it'll just roll on through and be amazing, and but it is an investment of time, and so to be able to kind of I think it would be so valuable just to share personal experiences of here's how this has allowed me to be more, right? It's a multiplier in ways, because it's allowed there to be more of me, not the same. Natalie and I certainly are not the same person. We have a lot of differences, but our thinking and our relationship, we're meshed so well that we communicate effectively. But I think that if you're not able to invest the time in sort of bringing someone into your world, building a relationship, because it's got to be such a strong relationship, and what is the knowledge that this person needs to have, like, so, but it's worth it. It is absolutely worth it to just be able to take on more, I guess is one way of saying it, but really to be able to focus on what you should be focusing on. Like, how many of us get bogged down with stuff that we're like, oh, like, why am I spending my energy here? And it just helps to alleviate those things so you can be your like best strategic leader self, focused on the people and the dynamics that need your focus and attention, and having someone help manage all the rest of the stuff is the, I think that's the crux of it.
And I think it's important to say that there is a time investment up front. Let's set expectations here. Like any high level senior leader coming in, and possibly even more for a chief of staff role, because that's a very special dynamic relationship, you have to invest time. And a lot of people hear that go, the last thing I have is more time. And so that's a trade-off. But if you're thinking about the long term, okay, you're going to have to do something at some point, be proactive about it, and then the tipping point will come, which you described, which is like my world gets better. Look, my world gets better. I have more time and I'm able to do more of the strategic things that I should be spending my time on, which exponentially help your team and your company. So I think I love how you outlined that and said, look, it is.
The offshoot of it that I think wasn't expecting, even though Natalie and I had worked together previously, was she's seeing things about what would make me an effective leader that I wouldn't even think about. And so with some of the communication stuff, like, Bethany, you need to be sending these communications to the team. You need to be meeting with these people. Like, she's pulling things out that wouldn't, not only would I not have been like, oh, I don't have time for that, but I wouldn't have even thought of them. And some of those things have been the most effective things in creating a leadership brand, creating connection to the team. Our team's going through a transformation. Some of these things are so critically important. So, like, just having that additional perspective and strength come in from the side that like wouldn't have even been in my and in my thought process has been tremendously valuable.
Yes, there's that extra set of eyes and ears that are 100% for you and support you and aligned with you, but they just see things that you don't because you're two different people. And so it's just more data points in that sense and more ideas and innovation.
Yeah, she's willing to speak things to me that maybe others on the team aren't. So I think that's the feedback that comes up from your leaders. There's always it's hard to give your boss feedback. So I think she comes at it from, she has a different perspective on it, and it's helpful to be able to hear things I need to hear.
That's a great point because I can count so many times where people would just be venting and just be really passionate about this in a one-on-one conversation with me. Yet we would walk into the CEO's office, be like, okay, well, so like so-and-so has something to say. Oh, no, 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 everything's fine. It's great. No, 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 we're fine. It's like, come on, we just talked about this in the hall.
Absolutely. Yes, it's so true.
Bethany, anything else you wanted to throw in for chiefs of staff, for principals, or even executive colleagues who might be working with the chief of staff?
Yeah, I don't. I mean, I really I have the one experience with my trusted partner, but I will say that it's such a flexible and, make it what you need it to be experience that I think, like, that's part of what I think excites me about it. It's not this kind of like out of the box, here's what a chief of staff is what do you need? What do you need today? What do you need next year? Like, and how to morph that is just like having this a partner in crime, so to speak. So I do, as someone who started from a place of like, what am I going to do with this person? And this is just another person that I need to like find work for. That was where my starting attitude was. I was like, I don't know where I'd be without having that level of support. So that's my plug for the position, and investing in or finding someone who has that meshing right with your style, your personality is so valuable.
Beautiful. And Natalie spoke very highly of you in her episode. And she and I have had some conversations outside of that where she raves about working for you and really appreciates the time that you invest in her. And I can tell that you would be a great leader to work for. So Thank you for everything you do. Thank you for being on the show, and I really appreciate you sharing your insights.
Thanks so much, Emily. Appreciate it.
If you enjoyed today's episode, please like, share, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.